我们很难得可以邀请到的贵宾 Professor Peter Skilling 教授来为我们进行一场关于跨文化翻译的演讲。那教授很谦虚，请我不要做任何的那个溢美之词来夸赞他但我想就是简单的说，教授他是常年都在做巴利文本的收藏，还有他对于大藏经跨语言的大藏经的研究有非常多深的研究。那长期以来也是我们清哲基金会的顾问。然后对我们而言呢，对原版法上的译者而言，其实教授像我们的明灯，他对于翻译的想法，他对于翻译的认真，然后讨论对于翻译的哲学都有非常多的他的见解。对于我们的译者而言，真的是非常高兴有这样的前辈愿意跟我们在佛典翻译这件事情上分享他的想法。I just briefly said we are inspired by your work.
Thank you.
OK，那接下来我们就请 Professor Peter Skilling 来跟我们进行一下演讲。他以为他只需要讲10分钟，所以可能不会讲到1个小时。OK，谢谢。He said you thought you only need to talk for 10 minutes.
5 minutes? Good morning. I'm sorry that I can only speak in English. I cannot speak any Chinese. And I could speak in Thai. If that helps, yes. Or in my rapidly declining European or other languages are now all sort of dispersing into space. So I thank Kumara Jiva's group for inviting me to speak here. I think I might, sometimes I've been thinking I'm probably in the wrong room because I can't really say anything about AI, which seems to be the main topic of the meeting today. And in fact, I don't really know what it means. And in this rough draft, I ask questions, and I'm a stubborn old man, so I wonder how to translate this into Sanskrit or Tibetan, what it really means, what artificial means, what intelligent means. I have these kinds of questions. As a and I do not use Chinese. I do not have access to Chinese sources, but I do know the great importance of the C-Beta project, which I've sort of followed from a very distant periphery for many years. And I know the work of Venerable women and others. And I have seen people working on that, and all of my colleagues who use Chinese sources use C-Beta and are generally happy with it. I think they can, and they talk about it and so on. Now, so I meant to talk about translation, but briefly I could talk about Pali and Indic languages. Generally, I sort of say, it's very generally, there are 3 main Buddhist canons. One is the Indic canon, or Indian language canons. None of the canons are singular, actually. One is the Tibetan canons, which probably we can include Mongolian and a few others. And the third is the Chinese canons. So I use the Chinese canons in translation only. Tibetan I do use. I will not talk about that. That is being handled well by BDRC and the University of Vienna and so on. And then I use the Indic canons in various forms, including the Pali canon, which is which I can say a few words about. I think that when I hear what I know and what I hear now about present and even future C-Beta, that you are about, I don't know what the term is, 500 million light years ahead of the work in Indic canons. We have hardly anything in this sense. And there are simple reasons for that. One is in Chinese, you have a unified character system, which, well, of course, I'm sure there are lots of historical, geographical details, but basically you have a unified body of texts. In just one of the Indic canons, Pali, we don't have that. The Pali canons are in basically, you can say the same language, but in different scripts. So if we want to do a critical study of a Pali text or the Pali Tripitaka, so-called Pali canon, we have to utilize Thai script, Burmese script, Sinhalese script, and for those are the main canons. But there are also manuscripts of great value. And I know on your C beta you have not only the so-called canons, but also other texts. We have a large number of texts, for example, largely in Thai, that are non-canonical in Pali, and these are only in manuscript. They're not edited into any Romanized or any other, even Thai script, any accessible form. So we're just at the edge of the vast garden of Pali works. So actually now we have critical editions, the Pali Text Society, the Burmese script edition, Chatta Sangiti or Chatta Sangayana. And those have been, I think have been made available in accessible digital formats. But these are actually both very poor editions, using a very limited number of manuscripts. The Pali text editions have, some of their works many of them are 100 years old or more, using only a few manuscripts available at that time. And to create a new edition of a Pali text, just a single volume of one of the major collections, like Digha Nikaya, takes years and years and teams of people. There is a project of the Dhammakaya group in Bangkok to edit the whole Tripitaka based on various manuscripts. Last I saw, they had a pilot edition of the first volume of the long discourses after I don't know how many years. And they are planning, I've just heard, to publish the Digha Nikaya in this year in Pali. So that's where we stand. We're at the beginning. Now, an alternate to that, which is not really satisfactory either, perhaps, but I believe in is having digital copies of manuscripts, and scholars who can do this work can then consult the manuscripts through digital images, which I can do that with, say, the Tibetan canons, which are collected by BDRC or Vienna, University of Vienna, for example. And then we don't have to make critical editions, or we can make critical editions by choosing certain manuscripts. And in Pali, this has not been done. And with BDRC, the Fragile Palm Leaves collection of Pali in Burmese script is being digitized, and that is only the first step. No one's digitized all the Thai script manuscripts. or the Sinhalese script manuscripts. And of course, then there's all that metadata and linking of all things and so on. So there is no, we're at the very beginning, and there's no expertise in this too, I think, and there is little interest. This is another problem. For example, with Tibetan, there are many practitioners who want to learn Tibetan. I believe, I hope they still do, and read the original Tibetan, and they can work on various projects. In Pali, practitioners read everything in English or in maybe French or something else, Hindi, and they don't want to learn Pali. They want people who want to practice vipassana or something like that. But they don't learn Pali. I mean, there a few do in academic circles and so on, but there's no base of people, even in Thailand, a Buddhist country, where you have a group of people who want to learn Pali and want to study the Pali canon in Pali and so on. It's very limited. So we have limited human resources too. So this is why we are where we are, I think, which is almost nowhere. And I'm not particularly involved in these things myself. And I do believe the access to digital images is one of the most important things, but that is difficult too. Having these National Library of Thailand has one of the biggest Pali collections in the world, hundreds of thousands of Pali texts in various scripts, but it's hard to get access to, even to see the manuscripts. They say they are digitizing, and we hope, but we don't know. I would like to give one. Well, okay, so the main Indic canon, which is most widely used and is translated into Chinese and digitized, I think, is the so-called Pali canon. There are also the Gandhari texts, recently discovered and being studied. And these take a lot of work to decipher and edit. And these are fragments. Pali, we usually have a complete manuscript. Gandhari are fragments and very, very valuable. And that is being done, but slowly by a tiny number of people like Mark Allen and Richard Solomon and others. So there is and then as for Sanskrit as well, there is no Sanskrit canon. If you want to speak in terms of agamas, there is no complete set of agamas of any Nikaya, any school of Buddhism. No Sanskrit or Prakrit or anything. The only complete Indic agama is the Pali Nikayas, the four Nikayas, etc. So these are different challenges. You can't really have a Sanskrit canon project. Well, there is the group in Kathmandu that has digitized Nepalese manuscripts. That is one of the canons. So there's many canons, many alphabets. In Pali too, there are many, not only the modern scripts, you can get the complete printed edition of the Tripitaka and Burmese, Sinhalese, and so on, Pad Thai. But the older things, like the Thai manuscripts, are in several different scripts, which nobody reads anymore. So with Tibetan, you have people who are reading the script hasn't really changed, except some of the Dunhuang. So we have all these problems, multiple scripts, Gandhari, and I wanted to mention a case point is the Milinda Panha, the very famous questions of King Milinda, which exists in an edition done by the Danish scholar Trenkner from 1880 something. That is considered the main source for it. And people also use sometimes the Burmese script, Tata Sangiti edition. Fine. It happened that I noticed that the Thai printed edition from 1920, Thai script Pali, is different from the Roman edition. Different contents, different order, and large parts are the same, and then there are different order of divisions. And I wondered where that came from. Unfortunately, a student in Bangkok did this, Teng Jin Ui from Malaysia, and he actually studied, he looked at least 50. And I actually said, please find out what's going on with the Thai edition. Don't mix them up. First, we find out what's going on with the Thai edition, then we can look at the Burmese, then we could maybe look at the Sinhalese and see. So it turns out I had done a little bit of peeking at some Burmese manuscripts, and they differ quite radically. So it turned out there's no unified body of text of Milinda Panha. Of course, it's a closely related text. And the Chinese has been rather much studied, I think, Chinese Milinda Panha, which is only relates to the beginning, the first section, so to speak, of the Pali version. And then there's another 5 or 6 sections of the Pali, which are not found at all in Chinese, and they are their own independent. I believe these are independent. There was a family of Milinda dialogues, and there's evidence for that in the Chinese itself, in a few Chinese stories, dialogues, and in Abhidharma Kosha, they also quote in Sanskrit a dialogue from Milinda Panha, which is not found anywhere, not in Pali, not in Chinese or anything. And there's a few other examples here and there, which shows to me that it's a family of texts. And to think of it as a unitary text even is problematic. And now Dr. Eng Jin Ui is studying Pali text called Milinda Sankepa or Sangshepa, abbreviated Milinda, which is not actually abbreviated of any known Milinda, but is a very interesting Milinda in its own right. So just a single text, highly regarded text in the intellectual history of Indian Buddhism and Pali Buddhism and modern Buddhism, has this complexity and intertextuality that is almost mind-boggling, and this one scholar has been able to do it. And no one has done that for any other text in Pali. I have, by accident, found out when I was studying the Pali Jataka commentary that there is this same, there is a similar kind of variety. Sometimes the Thai version had extra sentences or different readings, significantly different readings from the Pali text. So we have this over-exaggerated idea that the Pali Text Society edition is something of great weight and importance. It is important just by the fact that they did it and that made that available. And making it available online, as it is now digitally, is an excellent thing. But we cannot treat it authoritative in the same way you can, as I believe, with the C-beta texts, which contain comparisons, contain variants, and give access to variants. So the situation for Pali needs somehow several, not only dozens, but hundreds of people to be motivated to learn, and not only that, learn the language, the scripts and study the manuscripts. And that is hard. Digitization of manuscripts is then extremely valuable in this case because you cannot travel to the National Library of Sri Lanka, probably even the National Library in Burma. I don't even know if it's open these days. The country's in a bit of a mess. And the European libraries, it's too difficult. But if these are, anyone can support or encourage the digitization of manuscripts, and of course a cross-referencing system all exists in a way inherently in some of the Tripitaka models. That is, I think, the next step. That tends to be ignored. Nobody listens to me. And then, of course, as I said, people want their Tripitakas in English. Fine. And do we have good English translations? Well, that's a whole other study, but yes, they've been evolving, and Bhikkhu Bodhi's translations in recent time have raised the quality very much. And a critical work on the Agamas by Bhikkhu Analayo and many others have also raised our understanding of the evolution of the Buddha Dharma, which is, I think, what we want to know. And we need to avoid looking for a single authoritative text, making the ability, the opportunity to compare and to consult other editions and to kind of dismantle the idea of a single text. So this is hard to say to groups who want to do things, or donors, or pious people, or so on. One time a man invited me, wanted to meet me from a powerful family in Bangkok. And he said he wanted to make a translation of the Pali Tripitaka. He was making a translation of the Pali Tripitaka, an edition of the Pali Tripitaka in Roman script to present to His Majesty the King on his birthday. And I said, which birthday? Well, his next birthday, of course. And then I said to him, okay, well, you could produce, the only thing you could produce is what we will call he knew English very well, a pious Tripitaka. That means just get all the words there in Roman and make it very nice. He had lots of money and he could do that. But a critical Tripitaka is impossible in between now and the end of the year when the birthday was, or even in 10 years or in 20 years, to edit one thing like the Sutta Nipata, the old texts, and sometimes there's no answer, which is right and which is wrong. So I think he kind of dropped me from his group, fortunately, and he did never finish even the Pious Tripitaka, actually. And he was also a bit difficult. So anyway, that's that. I should say then, to come to translations, I should do some advertising. So I have published a few translations as well as editions also of Genjur, Tibetan Genjur texts and Pali texts. I believe that translation is a human art or a human craft. It entails reading, understanding the ideas and thoughts of a human being, primarily Shakyamuni and other Buddhas, Bodhisattvas, Arhats, and intellectual figures of Buddhist history. Translation is an intellectual venture or adventure of the human intellect. It's a human enterprise performed by humans for a human audience or readership. I might call what I do, or what I try to do, humanistic translation done in a humanistic spirit. Translation involves mind and consciousness, And in Abhidharma terms, the Namakaya, Padakaya, and Vyanjanakaya, the body, the corpus of nouns, words, phrases, and letters. Perhaps it's an activity of the luminous mind, the Prabhastra Chitta, and perhaps it's an expression, translation is an expression of Buddha nature, which means anybody can translate because everybody has Buddha nature. So it seems like a good idea to locate AI to find out where and what it is. And I'm speaking as a layman, of course, and I'm not speaking of C-beta and tangible, intangibly tangible, tangibly intangible projects. We won't go into tangible and intangible heritage for now. It's good to locate what it is in terms of Buddhist terminology, ethics, and psychologically. That's what tedious old dogmatic people like me do. And I believe I'm translating the words of the Buddha, who is described as follows. There is a Pali phrase here. Roughly, there are 3 teachers or something that arise in the world, and one of them is the Tathagata, who arises in the world, Indabhikkhave Tathagato Loke Upajjati, and he's a completely realized Buddha, and so on. And this person, this Buddha teaches the Dhamma, so Dhammang Deseti. Why? This is the first person in the world who appears for the benefit of many people, for the happiness of many people, out of compassion or sympathy for the world, for benefit, for good, for happiness of gods and men. So for me, that's kind of the key phrase. Bahu Jana Hitaya, Bahu Jana Sukhaya, Lokana Kumpaya, and so on. That is the goal, I think, of all translation and edition and so on. That's the goal that that motivates the C-Beta project and others. Why are we doing all this? It's for the benefit of all sentient beings. So my goal is to translate, I hope, Bahujana Hitaya, Bahujana Sukhaya, Lokanukampaya. And so I've done a couple of books of translations in addition to numerous tedious articles in inaccessible journals or increasingly accessible journals. One was Questioning the Buddha, that has already been published by Wisdom Press. That is 25 basically sutras, texts translated from the Tibetan Kensher into English. And then this one is forthcoming, I believe in February, Buddha's Word for Tough Times. And that is an anthology, which actually means there's 20 translations, some from Pali and the others from Pali, Sanskrit, and Tibetan, let's say. And that, I hope, will come out nicely. Wisdom that makes nice books. And so this is what I do. I sort of produce books. And I hope it's for the benefit of all beings. And I have long introductions to both of them, trying to resituate the Buddhist scriptures in the longer history, let's say the longue durée of early Buddhism, emphasizing the beginning that we cannot so far have access to. That means the oral period. These texts, like the Agamas in particular, these were transmitted for 300, 400, 500 years orally by the sanghas, by the monks. And there's a whole history in that, which of course is well known and scholars have written about it, but I try to emphasize more that it's, well, of course, there's various reactions to this sort of study information. One is the hard skepticism, which says, well, these things couldn't have been transmitted orally. And there's no, we can't really see anything historically valuable because 500 years of oral transmission, and that is okay if they want to. We have to look critically. In this case, we can compare the transmission of the Veda and the Hindu scriptures by the Brahmins, who were as you know, family-based group, let's say clan-based group, who had a very sophisticated system of memorizing and transmitting scriptures up to the present. And the Brahmanical scriptures, the Vedas, were not really written down until even the 12th, 13th century. They began to write them down, and manuscripts still didn't count and still don't really count for a lot of Brahmin groups. Although I think this has, and I'm speaking in terms of even, our existing scholarly literature, which means 20, 30 years ago. But now, with the vast changes in society, the Brahmins who knew and transmitted this system, that has, I understand, generally broken down. It's much stronger in South India, but not strong. And well, there's a whole other thing about relying. What do we rely on? In the old days, they relied on their own minds and their own transmission. And when you have writing, then you start to forget. And when you have these things, you forget even more. Once upon a time, I knew my own phone number, and I don't. So whatever the case may be, then I stress in the introductions the long oral period, and that the Buddhists developed a system. This is well known, the Bhanaka system of transmitting by the Sangha, not by a birth-based group. And the Sangha trained people to transmit texts. And then there are very interesting things about the idea of a complete canon, which was mentioned. I can't go into here, but Vasubandhu, great Vasubandhu, I think it was fundamental to his thought, his critical thought, his comparison of the Buddha's teaching of different schools, different agamas. Vasubandhu says that the first classification, the first so-called council, the Mula Sangiti, is lost. So we know it only, he has a very wonderful critique of all this in his Vyakya Yukti, unfortunately not translated yet in any language. It's not available in Chinese and not available in Sanskrit, only in Tibetan. But that is in some of his other works too, that the Mula Sangiti, the root recitation after the Buddha's death, was no longer, he didn't believe, and others didn't believe in his time, that it existed. The different collections of different sanghas were all we have, and they are sufficient. We can study them in their own right. We shouldn't go around complaining too much. And in contrast to this, the Pali Canon seems to believe that their Sangiti, their Sangayana, was complete and is preserved completely. And so this is these are very different attitudes. Perhaps Vasubandhu agrees a bit more with modern attitudes, critical attitudes. Anyway, it's worth, this is worth considering. And Vasubandhu actually brings in he could be citing the result of critical scholarship of Pali, Central Asian Sanskrit, comparative agamas, and so on, when he's writing in the 4th century CE, because he says, well, it's a very interesting passage where someone says, you say the Mahayana is the Buddha's word, but where is it in the Tripitaka? Which group is it? In the ninefold or 12-fold Buddha Vachana? Where is it? It's not there. So it's not in a complete Buddhist canon. And Vasubandhu says, where do you get this idea of a complete and perfect Parishuddha, Yangdakpa, I suppose, Buddhist canon? And then he says the different Nikayas arrange the agamas differently. They have different titles. The texts differ. And he quotes a lot too. And he had a very critical attitude. Sorry. So these are all complexities. Unfortunately, I think are not brought out sufficiently in I can only speak for English and French a bit, our European language textbooks. And we do need now new textbooks, summaries of pretty well everything, I'm afraid. It's the same problem of not having enough people power. So our current textbooks hardly mention the Gandhari texts, which have completely opened up the northeast of India, Gandhari Prakrit, and the whole aspects of Buddhism. And even now, we have access to a few texts of the so-called Pudgalavada, Samantya Nikaya, which were all lost, but a few are being recovered. So we have another, and this confirms for those who studied in the Tibetan tradition, it's also in Chinese in a much more limited way, that there were 4 main Nikayas in northern India, 4 main monastic schools, and each had its own language. And that is confirmed by these discoveries. And also the nature of the languages assigned to Mahasangika, Stavira, and so on is also confirmed. So Buddhism is not a monolingual system. And still writers will say Pali or Sanskrit, which is, there never was a dual system like that anywhere in historical Buddhism. There were languages, Indic languages. And the idea of Pali or Sanskrit sort of was an accident of the late 19th and 20th century when the British discovered Pali in Sri Lanka, and also kind of the British or European scholars discovered Sanskrit Buddhist texts in Nepal. So there's 2 Buddhisms. And then all kinds of other distortions crept in, but I won't give a sermon today. Excuse me. I think I've taken up my time now, haven't I? My 10 minutes is over? Okay. Yeah, I just asked some questions. I'm going to try to write this up about AI. What does it mean? What is artificial? What is intelligence? How do we translate these terms into Sanskrit, Tibetan, Thai, Newar, Marathi, or Chinese, for example? And that actually the answer is easy. Yes, it's AI in all those languages. Now, is that really wise? And or is it Mati, Sumati, Mahamati, or Buri, Panya, Meda? Is intelligence here? Does Prajna mean Sherab? Is it Gyana or Yeshe? Does it have any human or humanistic value or meaning? How does it relate to the Buddhist categories? This is kind of what interests me. Does the notion of artificial intelligence fit into, or is it compatible with the comprehensible in the terms of Buddhist philosophy, Buddhist ontology, Buddhist metaphysics, or Buddhist soteriology? So we shouldn't forget that Buddhism, the Dharma, the Sadharma, is a living heritage of ideas and thoughts, and a rich and sophisticated philosophy of mind and language. So we should try to link up these with our modern ideas. And I think one of the failures I've noticed of Buddhist thought, modern Buddhist thought, and there are exceptions, particularly of some of the Chinese masters of the 20th century, 21st century, is to express current ideas in Buddhist terms of our terminologies and not always jump into the latest fashions of postmodernism and Derrida and these people. That's fine. Okay, we shouldn't ignore those people, but we have to use Buddhist concepts to express, to join in. Otherwise, there's no real dialogue. We're just imitating or parroting these ideas. And in terms of the 8 consciousnesses, what is this intelligence? And how does it relate to mental or mind consciousness, or to defiled mental consciousness, Krishna Manovinyana, or to root consciousness, Alaya Vijnana, whatever. And I went in here to a little bit on the different, how all of these things have different translations, even just from Rigpi, Wigpa, I guess. They give some of the variant translations and show how our translations are uncertain. That's fine. That's excellent to show the variants. And especially interesting to me was how does the idea, this intelligence, this artificial intelligence, fit into the 3 natures, the 3 swabhava or lakshana, Tri-lakshana, Tri-swabhava. Is it parikalpita? Is it the paratantra? Or is it parinishpanna, which are also, in any case, they are interrelated. You can't really divide them. But where does it really stand? Seems to me to be another type of parikalpita, related to the level of parikalpita. So there's the different translations, imaginary, other dependent, and so on. We won't go into that. And how does this relate to chitta? How does it relate to defilement and purification of minds? Where does it fit in, especially where does it fit in the chain of dependent arising? In Pali, avijja paccaya sankhara, sankhara paccaya vijnana. So is it in sankhara or is it in vijnana? Is it inside, adhyatma? Is it outside, bahirda, or both, or neither, ubaya, nobaya, and so on? Is it a form of abhuta parikalpa, mistaken imagination, like in the Madhyanta Vibhaga? So I think these sort of things should be maybe discussed and thought about. Is it a bhranti, an error, a maya, an illusion? Well, okay. Is it samvriti? And I know that it's a tool. Does that mean it's an upaya? Is it a kusala upaya? And I am not familiar enough what's going on. I mean, C beta is an extremely valuable tool. And then the question of machine translation is another question, which I also don't understand. And so there's so much that I don't know about this topic. That's why I said I was in the wrong room. And maybe you want to defenestrate me. And finally, I would say that we have to examine all these things with apramada. That's awareness, carefulness, apramadena. We should not just accept things because they are the latest fad or fashion. And that is, I think, to me, I see AI everywhere now in almost every news story, and unfortunately involved in weapons and all sorts of other things. And so we have to be, I think, cautious and use it wisely, as the example of Venerable Huimin and others in the C Beta project. That is the wise use. So it relates to these things. And it's actually quite fascinating, but I am usually spending my time surrounded by books trying to translate. So thank you. I think I better shut up now. And
Thank you, Professor Peter Skilling. I know actually he been very puzzling why we invite him to an AI workshop. He said, don't really want to know much about it and I don't know what it is, but I think it's wonderful. Actually, Professor, I want to take this opportunity. There's a little bit question and answer time. So actually the last session you were reading, you're asking questions. They are all in Pali, right? If I understand that the key words are Sanskrit words. So do you mind to translate for people like us who don't know those terms? I'm sure a lot of people are like, we want to know the questions you are raising so we can think about it.
I think everybody should know Sanskrit.
How many people know Sanskrit? And the only people on this side.
These are Yogacara terms. We have a master here.
Yeah, or maybe, okay.
Yeah, no, I wrote this. It's a long story, but I'm sort of here by accident too, not only in this room, but in Taipei. I was on my way to New York, but I got lost and I've been here. And somehow or other, I ended up, some people kindly invited me to lecture here and there. And overnight, I have been rather busy. And so I didn't have time to prepare this except in immediately quick things that I could write, like Vranti, Maya, and so on. And yes, that's the problem of translation. So how am I going to translate these things? And I looked at Wiki, and then they have variants, some of them very good, some of them not to me, and I don't want to get into that. But yeah, I will try to make a translation, and I'm trying to think in terms of the set of categories used in Abhidharma. And they are shared. There are variants in all schools. So there's the Pali, they're called Matika. How do we translate Matika? Matrika. So they are the sort of grids of ideas, like Kusala Dhamma, Abhyakata Dhamma. So everything is put into, is it Kusala? Is it wholesome, beneficial? Is it akusala? Is it unwholesome or non-beneficial? Or is it indeterminate? So there's this whole grid of ideas, values, that is used, which is recited to this day in Theravada sanghas and societies. and I won't go into the details. It's actually largely recited at funerals. That's not teaching the past to be consciousness. I think they are actually invoking the fact that the Buddha is supposed to have taught this to his mother in the heaven. Anyway, so there are these systems. The Abhidharma Samuccaya of Sangha is a very lucid one. I'm not sure, is there a really good translation of that? Venerable? Abhidharma Samuccaya, is there a recommended translation in English? Really good? Okay. In Chinese, probably, yes, Yao Xuanzang. I mean, yeah. So this is another problem of using of our glorious English language, which by accident became the world language. And now England is sort of floating off somewhere from Europe. Post-Brexit English, we had post-colonial, post-empire, and now post-breakfast, forget about that. But the language still persists, and it's widely used, and it's not a bad language. But the Buddhist translations, another thing I have mentioned to others, I've had some very good discussions with people here, and how in Chinese culture, this isn't concerning translation, you have a very rich and diverse traditions of translation and commentary in Chinese of Buddhist ideas, relating in dialogue, whatever, with what we could call earlier ideas, I guess, without much trouble, Taoist and Confucian and other ideas of Chinese philosophy. So there is this long this depth, not only temporal depth, not only in terms of time, but in terms of the layers of meaning and philosophy. In English, of course, we have things beginning in the 8th century or 9th century. I think CE is some of the very earliest Old English texts. So we can trace the language, but not the ideas, and we don't have a tradition of translating Buddhism into English since before the 19th century. So it's a very shallow layer in our thought. So this is one of the problems we face. That was one of the aspects I was going to speak about. What's it called? Comparative or cross-translation. We have different problems in English than you do in English, in Chinese, or for example, in Thai, it's not so difficult, but how it's a different understanding. They use loan words for almost everything. So there are 5 aggregates in Pali, Rupa, Vedana, Sanya, Sankara, Vijnana, and in Thai, Rupa, Vedana, Sanya, Sankara, Vijnana. So you can learn all these categories in Thai without knowing what they mean. And that is convenient, but they need more than that too. So I can only say, to close again, that translation is very complicated and very much culturally bound and historically bound. And that is, you have that background more clearly in Chinese culture, I think, than we do in, say, European culture, or even perhaps modern Thai or Sinhalese or other culture, because we tend to limit our Buddhism to our Tripitaka, our Thai language Tripitaka, or our Sinhalese language Tripitaka, and so they don't have the broader sense of I wouldn't dare say universal Tripitaka, but a broad-based Tripitaka. And so we have all of these problems. Also, the things are done in vernaculars, and that is very valuable. We talk about, I've mentioned briefly the problems of digitizing or making critical editions of Pali because of the different scripts. But in addition to that, every Buddhist culture has its own vernacular texts, which maybe sometimes are quite unique, not connected to Pali. And we have Thai texts in Pali too, and in Thai that are not found, not recited in Burmese or in Sinhalese, in Ceylon. So there is a great deal to study, and we're hoping that there is a new generation of scholars who will keep this up, and that the institutes, Dharma Drum and other institutes, National Taiwan University or others, will support and see the importance of this scholarship in this investigation. It's a critical aspect, actually. It's ludicrous that they don't see it. It's a critical aspect of human intellectual history. And now you're getting access to that. And access to that is easier with the C-Beta project, but whole other aspects of Buddhist studies need support and need technological development and so on. And that is, it's really critical. Now, if we talk about French literature, you can get access before in books and editions and studies of French literature. And now most of that is being digitized or scanned by the National Library of France. There's several places where almost any serious book you can get through the Bibliothèque Nationale de France. And so this is the way, and we have to keep up with these people who are very agile and very fast with their developments. And somehow or other, we have to encourage that open-mindedness, that enthusiasm of the C-Beta project. Somehow that has to be translated into other sleepy Southeast Asian countries and so on. And I hope it will be. Anyway, thanks.
Thank you.
Yeah, so I will translate. Give for you soon, before the end of the kalpa.
Thank you. Yeah, so thank you, Professor Princess Killing. His speech, I think, Professor is saying we'll make it available later. So thank you, Professor. And so is anyone at the audience who would like to ask Professor some questions or give some comments or feedbacks? I'm actually very surprised, actually, how little is done in Pali. This first time I learned it, and actually, consider would like Kumarajiva to take on Sanskrit and Pali translations as well. And now I understand why all our editors are saying, "Don't go there yet." Now I understand it's a challenging. Even the critical editions of Pali text are still yet to be developed. Okay, thank you.